Welcome to another episode of Stewart Squared, the podcast where me and my father go into the history of the personal computing industry, the internet, and the mobile phone revolutions. And then we analyze what's going on in terms of AI in the context of that history, which everybody seems to have forgotten. Nobody looks at history anymore. And so we're going to have a great conversation about the Evernet, which is a theory that my father developed probably back in, I think I first heard you talk about it in 2010. Is that right?
Yeah, John, as part of the starting of our firm, we were trying to figure out, if you're going to invest in the future, what's the future look like? And so we came up with this idea of the Evernet. But in our 15 years ago, in our minds, it would be amazing if all the computers were connected and it was high speed. And so the internet would be as good as a local area network and connect everything and in broadband, and um, the world would be different as a result. Now, I'm thinking the internet is much more interesting,
Hmm.
um, and I'm taking two things. One is, well, Starlink in general, but you may know that Starlink introduced the Starlink Mini.
Yeah.
You put it in your backpack and bring the internet with you in a backpack. Well, that's pretty interesting itself. Um, and it's clear that Starlink is obviously going to make as many devices as possible to make different connections possible. They already have what's called flat high performance, which you can attach to a boat or an RV and actually use while you're driving. And so mobile, remote, and so that's interesting itself. And so, to my mind, the terminal started out one way and then it gets smaller or more powerful. Um, and then there's another little squib which I'm been ruminating on, which is that in Apple's last WWDC, Worldwide Developers Conference, they made a small announcement that virtually is unnoticed. I haven't seen anybody write about it in the flood of things that they announced, including their version of AI called Apple Intelligence. And that's that they introduced SOS like 2 phones ago, and with the iPhone 14, which meant that you could be in the middle of nowhere with no signal at all, either Wi-Fi or cellular, and you could make an emergency call, and somebody would answer the phone, and if you were hurt or injured, they'd get emergency services to you. And so that was like kind of cool, and everybody noticed that. But this past um, developers conference, they announced that you'd be able to iMessage through the satellite. So it means you can text people while you're out in the middle of nowhere. And well, that's really interesting. Is if they start with emergency services and then they do iMessage, where does it stop? And why don't you just always use the satellite as your internet connection? Now, as it is, it's slow and it's specialized. Only this one app that they have called iMessage that will use it. Yeah. And but you can imagine that they just keep making it better and better, like over the next few generations of iPhones. Um, and they're working with Globalstar, providing satellite services, network service, and they're giving Globalstar a lot of money anyway. So you think you see these two things: Starlink coming from, you know, broadband fixed at your house to roaming and in your backpack and getting smaller and smaller. They got the iPhone more and more able to talk through satellites. And maybe you get to the point. So I said, okay, well, what would the end point of this be? And I go, okay, well, I've got my Oura ring here, and what if you could have a persistent network connection in the Oura ring through satellites? I mean, how much processing power does that take? Well, it still takes a lot because you got to beam the signal back and forth to the satellite. So actually, the real issue is power, and that. So working through
Mhm.
this whole thing, and the thing that's really funny about Starlink Mini going in your backpack is you still need a power cable. They give you like a 40-foot power cable. So you go like, where are you going to plug in if you're like using a backpack? So I guess coffee shops maybe, but you can't really use Starlink Mini when you're hiking. And but you can use your iPhone. Well, the next version of the operating system for the iPhone will allow you to text people
While you're hiking.
hiking.
And and
These things have to converge at some point.
do you remember about 3 years ago when I was in my prepping world in the mountains, that I got a satellite phone and I started text messaging you right before I went
Yeah,
skiing? And this was specifically an emergency situation. I was going off into the woods, cross country skiing on my own in unknown territory, and I wanted to make sure that I had a messaging way, and it's very expensive, um,
yeah.
and they gave me a
Valerie
mobile
has it
device.
too. Valerie has
Uh,
a Garmin phone that allows her to text um, when she's riding in case she has a problem, which she had at one point. She fell off horse and had to wait for her rescue. But fortunately, she was in cell range. And
And so there's lot of different things that I want to go into from there. May have something to do with Evernet, but more is also just kind of in the general theme of the history of it. And so there's space. There's the fact that
yeah,
space is being commercialized, and as we talked about yesterday, it's communication networks and imagery networks are the two big things. Then there is battery technology that and I put this into my spaced repetition flashcard system of all these different types of batteries that may have potential. The one that I'm learning about is magnesium batteries. And there's all these replacements for the lithium batteries, but the current generation of lithium batteries, I had a solar panel system in my van, and there was a large battery that I had to haul around, which I could do in my
yep.
van, but I couldn't do that if I were hiking around. That would be quite a big challenge to. What's your take on battery technology?
Uh, that's the that's the problem.
Hmm.
Um,
And it's always been the problem, right?
yeah, it's the gating item because microprocessors chips keep getting more powerful and smaller. Um, they
Oh,
become they use less Jews, right? That was uh, there is a battery in my Oura ring,
yeah.
and the Oura ring is so simple; it doesn't take much power. I mean, you still have to recharge it every 6 or 7 days. Um, and so you can stack rank it all the way up from that to smartphones. Um, these batteries are really amazing what they've done.
It's a lithium battery.
Um, it's a lithium-ion battery.
Yeah.
Lithium is a material that's used in batteries. So there's lithium-ion, and it's just above my pay grade because I can't quite figure out what this is all about. But we have a company working on lithium metal,
Hmm.
um, and but the real trick there is they've got this ceramic um, material that they can use to package the battery cells. And their battery technology. I've learned way too much about this, but these battery you have to be really careful with these batteries that are in smartphones, and Samsung experienced this um, because you have to compress the battery. Um, that means there needs to be pressure always around the battery, and if the seal breaks or something else happens, the battery can get on fire, and that's what happened with the Samsung. I can't remember which one it was, but um, the so um, this company's technology doesn't require any pressure. You can do it at zero pressure, and it's stable and won't catch on fire under any circumstance. And so it's a better battery, of course, but it's different, and therefore you have to figure out how to get it into the market. this is not the only company. There's probably 24 companies that are working on different forms of battery technology. You mentioned magnesium. I've never heard that. Don't know
Yeah.
about it. Um,
It might have
Hopefully,
been.
it's not because
It might.
magnesium burns and creates power.
It's a charge carrier, something about a charge carrier, but there is a potential failure point here, which is that I'm getting my information from ChatGPT, so it could be hallucinating that there is a magnesium battery. Um,
Yeah.
so 24 companies that are working on these different technologies. It brings to mind not necessarily something related to the Evernet, but it kind of is as well, because you came up with this theory 2010, somewhere around there. And so there are all these things that come into the world, and they come in through some combination of academia, researchers doing unfettered research, just researching the nature of reality. And then there's also the industries who have taken those researches that have been applicable, used their engineers to build technologies that actually work. And then there are startups that take ideas from the industry and take ideas from academia in some unknown combination. And at some point, these technologies work. So how have you figured out within your own mind, if it is like figured out in your own mind, how to realize whether something is going to come now or something's going to come 10 years down the line?
Yeah. There's the trick.
Yeah.
So we invested in this battery company 5 years ago. I think it was research that was developed at the University of Maryland, and the guy who did the research was the founder of the company.
Hmm.
And
Mhm.
the tricky thing at that point is academics aren't really good at product development. And so we actually hired a guy to run the company who was the guy that ran Apple's battery business for
I
10
see.
years.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
And Apple's batteries never blew up. So we felt this was a good thing. The But so there's this process and trying to figure out how long it's going to take is very difficult. And a lot of people swear off at battery technologies because the whole history of the battery business is always takes longer than you want it to. So the fact that we have lithium-ion batteries now that can fit into a smartphone and keep it going for 12, 14 hours is remarkable. But that's been only a development of incremental
Yeah. Okay.
improvements,
Where,
process improvements
yeah.
and so because the battery inside the iPhone, I assume it's the same for Samsung and others, is this little thin thing that's on the back of the phone. It's like really thin because I got to pack all the other stuff in there. Um, so that's remarkable. But the batteries, you know, um, not to go back to
Yeah.
Elon Musk, but Tesla's, he's
Mm.
got these gigantic battery manufacturing plants. Because a Tesla, their battery is like the biggest and heaviest item in the car. Um,
Mm.
the and they've optimized for using the rotation of the wheels to generate um, positive uh, battery charging, and then but they can't run it all the time, so it's like a total balancing act, which Toyota actually innovated with the hybrid gas electric hybrid, and then Tesla optimized it for electric only. The But then there's you know uh, however you generate electricity, battery is just storage, right? So you can,
Mm.
um, if you have a big power plant, whatever is making the power, there's no battery big enough to take all the output of the power plant and store it.
Oh.
You can have some storage, like 5 minutes, right? So that you can smooth out the usage of the electricity, but there's no way to store everything that the power plant is producing. So um, that's the essence of the problem, independent of any other issues of a battery. Is if it's producing electricity, you have to have battery to store it, and storage is the hardest problem in
Yeah.
power production.
And this is what I did a recent interview with the company Varda, which I may or may not have sent to you. But Varda, basically, what they do, I'm sorry, not Varda, Valor Atomics. Valor Atomics wants to build a nuclear reactor and then put hydrocarbons right next to the nuclear reactor, because the hydrocarbon, the oil, the way that fossil fuels, that's the way that you store energy. that's the best storage of energy, but it's an organic process. And in order to create those things, there's a lot of what I consider snake oil out there to create green hydrocarbon, green fossil fuels, green energy by using the grid to manufacture hydrocarbons, oil, but they're using the grid itself. And so, what powers the grid? Well, nuclear energy kind of powers the grid, but a lot of it comes from coal. And so they're just basically doing things that don't really make sense from a business standpoint because there's an incentive to do it from the government, and so the storage thing is really interesting. And let's go back into the history though. What Because it's all fuzzy for me what it was before the iPhone. What were batteries before? Was it a lithium ion? Was it always for the iPhone? Were lithium batteries always
Yeah,
out there? No.
lithium-ion was, as a form of battery, was developed about the same time as so it was one of the enabling technologies for smartphones. Um, before that, I think it was called NMH, nickel metal hydride, something like that. Those batteries were, big, and not terribly efficient. And the problem they'd have is over time, their ability to hold a charge would decline. So it wasn't kind of a permanent solution. You couldn't keep using it for like 10 years. I don't know if anybody has a 10-year-old iPhone or smartphone anymore, but so lithium ion was the first sort of portable small battery that was capable of holding its charge, and not diminishing over time. Although still some people suspect that Apple or Samsung or anybody else uses batteries that do decline over time to force people to buy new generations. But I don't think that's true. I think Apple and Samsung are doing everything they can to make sure these batteries last forever.
Oh, interesting.
It's other reasons to, I'm going to move to the iPhone 16 this fall. And because I didn't do the 15. It's like I've done every generation of iPhone until the 15 because I couldn't tell the difference between the 14 and the 15. So I still have a 14. And but with the AI stuff and what Apple's been talking about, I want to be up on the latest.
And that's the whole point of the show, is that there's something happening here that apparently puts a bow tie on the whole personal computing revolution. The
balloons.
Yeah, in the video, the balloons just came up. And so it puts a bow tie on the entire sort of personal computing industry. That kind of, it feels like to me that it's a marker that, okay, we're done innovating. We're not done innovating in the bits, but in terms of the innovation that's going to come, a lot of it's now going to be in other places. And AI feels like it's sort of like a bow tie into the software and hardware personal computing revolution. Those technologies are going to still really be important. But it feels like now something is going to change in terms of where people put their attention, including back to what we were talking about earlier, and this can go back into the Evernet, is satellites. So space is now being colonized. We're now colonizing near Earth orbit, not with people, but with robots. And now we have robots in terms of software, and so like there, it seems like that's a really important change. So what does the Evernet allow for? What will it allow us to do? There's talks about Aura rings. There's talks about uh, sort of a whole bunch of other things. But what does the Evernet allow us to do?
Uh, if something is ever present like the Evernet, it changes the way you think about it. The internet itself did that when it became broadly available, right? I mean, the internet in 1994 was only available with big computers on fast networks, mainly in universities, and government research. And but then once it got built into computers and the network improved enough, you could start surfing and looking around. And and learning about stuff which was not previously possible. And then once it became ubiquitous, you know, here I am on an island off the coast of Connecticut, and we have Wi-Fi. Keep trying to recommend they put Starlink in here, but it's too fast. Don't need it. The So the more you can assume something is true, the more it changes the way you use it. And so the difference between the internet as it is right now and the Evernet is the idea that with the satellites up there, network service is always available regardless of where you are. High speed internet access anywhere. And so a lot of what's talked about right now is, oh, Starlink is really cool. You can put it in places like Ukraine, which has lost all of its service, or remote Africa or South America. Everybody can have access to the internet. Right now, that's envisioned as what we're doing right now, which is we're both connected to the internet and doing video. But what if it's so present that that you can have a personal network of devices that all of them connect themselves to the internet, not necessarily to each other. And what does that enable? The problem to go around that little pole, you always come back to the battery. They all need power.
But if they're all connected in this way, if they're all connected to one satellite, or if you're on Wi-Fi, something interesting I learned about Starlink is that my friend went back to the United States and he had a Starlink and he left his Starlink here in Buenos Aires, but there's no point for me to use it. I'm looking at this. There's a outlined terrace out there, and I could put the Starlink out there, but then I would need to actually bring the cable in there because I need to actually put it up into the sky. So Starlink is a sort of edge thing that allows people in the outside in people like Ukraine that lost their internet, or going out into Patagonia. And an idea that we came up with yesterday was that I could actually record a podcast while walking around using Starlink and basically have the audio and then have a drone filming me and then basically stitch it together to create an awesome looking video podcast. And so that whole world. But then you mentioned devices, small little devices. If they're all have this connection with that thing up in the sky, it also means that they can connect with each other. And so that battery itself might not be, it takes into the Apple, the on-device type of thing, the fact that they're putting AI on their device, that's their whole thing. It's like, well, maybe that just keeps on better, 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 and you don't need the battery because you have these small little things connecting with each other.
You still need a battery. You always need a battery. You always need electricity to power digital devices, but by definition. The battery in a ring is, I haven't seen a expansion of this thing to see what's inside, but it must be like tiny, and yet it can go for a week. So it's I think the key to the battery thing is I'm pointing at my iPhone's what do they call the charging thing? MagSafe. We call it MagSafe because it's magnetic. And already they can use portable batteries to recharge at least a smartphone and extend the duration of a charge. I have a feeling there's going to be some form of battery that becomes, or charging that becomes ubiquitous through wireless charging. I mean, there's all kinds of fancy stuff you can start thinking about, like you mentioned, nuclear. There's also nuclear fission, and which provides limitless, which will at some point provide limitless, available, safe power, and but no one's figured out how to make that happen yet. So that's an item of faith. That you were asking about how to predict when a technology It's the difference between having an item of faith and actually being able to predict the development of the
Yeah.
technology. And even then, you're always wrong one way or the other. So our battery company, it's like now that we're 5 or 6 years into it, it's like we're going, how are we going to get money out of this company in the near future?
Uh-huh.
And so we talked about it becoming a licensing company and have bigger companies actually build the batteries and pay them for their technology, which might be faster than having to build the batteries themselves, which they're currently doing.
Oh, interesting. Yeah, and it's so hard. It's such a hard business, but I think that even though it's hard, you've enjoyed being a part of it,
Mm-hmm.
because you're dealing with the future, and the future is uncertain, but there's little tidbits that we can get about the way the future is going to do it, and you have to have an opinion on it, and then developing the opinion is a really interesting thing. How do you develop the opinions? What is your process for developing the opinions?
As you know, that we call all Alsop partners the geek and the gadfly.
Uh-huh, uh-huh.
If I didn't have Gilman, the geek, around, I'd have to do it myself. And I don't know how he knows all this stuff, but he knows all this stuff. He knows everything about batteries. He knows everything about storage and hard disks and servers. And, he walked in and talking about batteries. He walked into the partnership probably 12 years ago, maybe 10 years ago, and said, look, here's the problem. Server farms are taking so much power that um, electricity is more expensive than building the computers. Right? The power to make the servers run.
Oh,
Now this has been
oh,
doubled and tripled on a regular basis. Originally because of crypto mining stuff that went on, and then more recently by LLMs and the processing power it takes to process up billions of parameters. And so it's like a straight line, and more power. Now power for computing is taking some percentage.
yeah.
I can't remember what it is,
No,
but it's like 10% or something of all the power in the world.
it's currently 3%, and it's headed towards 9% in like 5 years.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's growing much faster than anything else, right? Automobiles become more efficient. Power plants become more efficient. So the percentage is increasing. It's going to compute. And, the people that run big server farms, putting them on rivers next to hydropower, they're trying to find special. I can't remember if I mentioned this to you, but I saw a business plan for somebody who wants to put servers in space. Different application, and hard to see how you make it work. But if you make it work, then they have solar power, and it's intense, right? Because you don't have the atmosphere in the way, and so you can run your server farms in space off of solar power, and you have infinite power available.
Oh. It's so wild. And so let's go into like last 10 minutes or so. Let's go into space. Space is, so we've got communications, and we've got imagery, and then we've got little tiny experiments in space manufacturing. I misspoke when I said about Varda instead of Valor Atomics. Varda is a company that I also did the interview with, and that they're doing space laboratories to create crystals inside of low Earth orbit, because there's some difference in terms of the way that the conditions are up there that allow them to create
zero
crystals.
gravity means they can manufacture the crystals without reference to both atmosphere and gravity.
And that's all. And there's a lot of speculative stuff there that might work, but it seems like we're headed to space. Like it seems like humanity's finally headed to space. That the dream of the 1960s, that could be a good conversation to have. 1968, that was when we landed on the moon, right?
That was earlier than that.
1962.
We were already on the moon by 68. I believe we landed on the moon when Kennedy was president, which would be 1961 or two. maybe it took longer after he was assassinated, but somewhere in the 60s.
Yeah.
And that was a massive effort. I mean, we all reacted because Russia put up the Sputnik satellite, and okay, government and intelligence agencies are all going like, they're spying on us. We have to get up there. And then we had to do better than they did, so we went to the moon.
Yeah. And
But
are we going to space? Like, what's going to happen?
well, I mean, so far, what we've done is tourism. Rich people can be on a rocket that goes up and comes back down. There's actually a company that's called Space Explorations that is not using a rocket. They're bringing the capsule up to using a weather balloon, and then how it gets back. Parachute, yeah. So it's all a very gentle ride, and it takes like 30 minutes to get up there, look around, and then come back down. That's not really the thing, but space tourism is like the deal is that if you can do space tourism, then it becomes normal, and you can do volume, and so you can reduce the cost of any one trip to space. So space tourism is kind of used as a milestone for when we go to space. Right? If you could do space tourism, then you can do living on the moon and living on Mars and so forth.
What's your
look at SpaceX's big rocket, Starship?
Yeah.
This thing is massive.
Yeah.
And they got it into orbit on the 4th try. So I think it got into orbit, at least it got up there. That's what Musk is doing. He keeps pushing the edge, saying, shooting out, for what's out there. So yeah, we're going to space, but right now it's not a very hospitable environment for us. So you have to do a lot of stuff to make it space something you can do.
Have you heard of Bezos's idea that instead of colonizing Mars or the moon, that we're actually going to just create habitable places, not in near Earth orbit, but close to near Earth orbit, so around the Earth?
If you read science fiction, everything has been written about.
Yeah.
So yeah, it wouldn't be if you're going to create a habitable structure in space, it has to be far enough away from your Earth that the gravity loses grip. In low Earth, there is gravity. In fact, that's how they essentially solve the space debris problem. Just if you're going to put a satellite up, you have to be able to bring it back down, so it doesn't keep floating around up there.
So that's really interesting. So is that a regulation?
No, it's like everybody knows it has to happen, but getting everybody to agree, particularly nowadays, very difficult.
It's the public commons. It's the public commons problem.
It is, yeah.
The commons problem.
So how do you pay for the rockets to get stuff up there? But if you get stuff up there, what is the stuff that collects the space debris and cleans up space?
Oh, that's a business idea. That's a business
problem. It is, and there are people working on it.
Who's doing that?
But who pays for it? What's it look like? First of all, I mean, space debris is like there's thousands of little pieces of satellites and little satellites running around up there that are no longer used. Well, how do you capture them? Like, do you put a big net out? But that only works for a certain size pieces of debris.
So who is doing it? Do you know off the top of your head who's doing space garbage collection?
I have to go back and look at who's there are governments, including the U.S. government, is funding research into how to resolve the space debris problem.
Yeah, okay.
If you Google or chat space debris, you'll see a lot of stuff.
So for the last 5 minutes, what is the article that you're planning on writing? What's your thesis as it's developing right now?
So I've been working on a constellation of devices, which has gone through so many changes that it's not really the same article I started with, which is the idea that you need small devices, small specialized devices collaborating with each other. Like the Aura Ring is kind of my primary example. There's other devices, but the Aura Ring doesn't participate in either the Apple or Google ecosystem because they don't want Apple or Google to make a ring to compete with them. And so that communicates with Bluetooth, and it's not real time. And so it was always recording, so it knows when I'm walking and doing stuff or sleeping or whatever. So it's always recording, but in order to get the data from the ring to the smartphone, you have to open the app and initiate a session so that it updates the app, and you get the data off the ring. And that's not real time. It requires both that you charge it, right? So you have to remember to charge it. The only way you can find out what charge is left is by opening the app. It's a little indicator. And so, like, I charged it last night. It's fully charged, but it didn't capture any data while I was sleeping.
Yeah.
And so you have to charge it the right way in order to get all the data. So my thesis is that the platforms, and it really is only just Google and Apple. There's Google Pixel, and then there's Samsung with Android, and Samsung has actually done a much better job, ironically, than Google, being a hardware company. So they actually do have Google or Samsung already has a ring.
Yeah.
That you can buy in it, or charges a subscription price, and you can buy the ring from Google and not pay any more. It's more expensive, but it exists in the Android ecosystem that Samsung's built. And so anyway, this is why it keeps changing, because I keep finding out more stuff, and it changes what I'm trying to figure out. But I'm basically trying to figure out how would you have a constellation of devices that does particular things for you, where it's not a total pain in the ass to try to charge them and so on and so forth. So it's I think I've got it worked out.
Yeah, interesting. Because there's downtime for the constellation, or there's downtime for the Aura Ring specifically, and that's only based on competition, of them not wanting to have an ever-present connection with the Apple ecosystem.
Well, the Apple and Android ecosystems are so different that you have to support each of them individually. So you'd have to go through some kind of process in setting up the ring to have it join the Apple ecosystem or the Android ecosystem based on what you use. And those ecosystems aren't that capable yet. Like Apple's taken about 10 years or more to figure out how to do real-time synchronization of data. And so that all of its devices are always up to date and synchronizing data with each other. First step was to do it on iCloud, and then making sure that the data is the same on every device in real time it's a really hard thing to do. Google hasn't really done it. Android doesn't because it's a service problem. It's a different issue than doing something on the device or so Apple is way ahead of Android in terms of synchronizing data across multiple devices and
Why doesn't
creating a trusted.
Why doesn't Apple have an Aura Ring?
I'd say they already got the smartwatch. They already got the watch, and they don't think they need it.
Yeah. Okay.
They could probably make it. Yeah, I mean, the Aura Ring is $300, and the Samsung Ring is $400. So there's stuff in here that costs money.
So there's a platform play that is currently not available that somebody could create a platform if these things weren't stuck inside of Apple or a Google ecosystem.
Yeah, how do you do it from the outside? Apple already does have an ecosystem, and they have the watch and the phone and the iPad and Macs, and that they have a pretty comprehensive set of devices, but they're all big and take a lot of power, and so it's great. But if you wanted to really make it good work for people, then I bought a charger. I have a thing next to my bed at home that I can mount the phone on it, I put the watch on it, and I can charge my AirPods on it. So I can charge 3 devices at once, and it's very convenient. It's actually not an Apple product. It's made by Belkin. And so, there's always this decision if you're the platform owner, how far do you go? Do you allow developers to profit inside your ecosystem, or do you just take over the whole thing?
Yeah.
So it's a balancing act.
Which Meta just did a brilliant play, in my opinion, of releasing their giant llama model so that they can become the open source ecosystem and build all the
So the thing I read yesterday is that yes, it's giant, but it is not as performant as others because it's not multimodal. It doesn't do video and audio. It only does text. And so yeah, it's as performant as GPT for text, but GPT is now doing video and audio.
That is a good detail that I did not get. I did a presentation on it yesterday, and I couldn't. That's really interesting. How did you find out that detail?
That was in the information's AI.
Okay, so it's information. Ooh, that's a good conversation to talk about information, how information the company itself managed to figure out how to do online media in a way that it seems like they actually have access to information that not a lot of people actually have. I'm reading this great book that I think you would love. It's called The Invention of News, I think it's called. It's the rise of journalism from printing press onwards. So how the printing press actually created journalism goes into the history of it.
So what's it? Get the name.
I think it's called The Invention of News. Let me fact check that. Of news. Google is totally destroyed. Yeah, The Invention of News. Invention of News.
How the world came to know. Well, it's good. I'm buying it right now.
Yeah.
It's funny because there was a museum which failed in Washington D.C. called Newseum, News, Museum, EUM, and it was really cool. It was a cool building on Pennsylvania Avenue. You could look down the avenue to the Capitol building, and they had at the top floor they had all the newspapers through time. So they had when after Gutenberg invented book printing, the first people to actually print news, and it was a German newspaper, and all the way up to like the New York Times and the Washington Post today. So they had front pages from history. So I thought that was fascinating, and it sounds like this book is a narrative.
Cool. Well, thank you so much, and we'll publish this, and next time we'll talk about information. Well, there's a whole bunch of things we can talk about next time, but
as always.
Yeah.